communities through good practices. And so please go ahead, put this day, every last Monday of the month, put it in your calendar so that we are able to gather here on a monthly basis to really talk about a number of issues, be it it's thorny, it's trendy, it's touchy, as long as it is about engagement in research. And today we are doing exactly that. Our session today is on tokenism, toxicity, and tailoring of engagement. We have a HIV/AIDS vaccine ethics group, HAVEG in short, that is led by Abigail. Abigail is with HAVEG, and her role is to investigate the ethical and legal complexities in HIV prevention trials. And currently, her focus is on the complexities of stakeholder engagement in HIV prevention trials and how ethics review may facilitate improved stakeholder engagement. And in fact, this is the work that Abigail will be presenting to us today through this publication that we have shared with most of you. And if you have not received the publication, we will be able to share it after this meeting today. And the paper that they're going to be sharing with us today as the whole team through Abigail as the leader was also presented at the latest HIV R4P conference. So with those words, we'd really like to say welcome, and we'd also like to know who you are. So please go ahead and use the chat box to tell us who you are and from where you are joining us today. Now, the three T's of tokenism, toxicity, and tailoring in stakeholder engagement. This is really what we're going to be discussing. And in fact, we're really looking at the role of ethics review processes to see, because I think this is what the paper in a way suggests, that there are opportunities, and in fact, unique opportunities that are presented by the ethics review processes to really enhance and optimize good participatory practices in the research processes. And one of the things the paper talks about is window dressing engagement. So from what we'll be hearing today, we'll really also be looking, from what most of us who have been part of this really had to say when they were asked about this subject on engagement and ethics. So I will, at this point, welcome you again once more and hand over to Abigail to really lead us. And the team will also be on standby for when we continue to have engagements around this. And as usual, please use the chat box, but also at a later stage, we'll really welcome your questions through the chat box as well as opening it up so that we can have an opportunity to be able to speak amongst each other, because this is the engagement forum. Over to you, Abigail, and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ntando. And thank you for this opportunity to share some of our research. We do have the other members of the HAVEG team on the call. We've got Kathy Slack and Siyabonga Tabete. So they'll be on standby, and they can also help when needed. So for this study, we conducted some interviews about engagement and about the review of engagement. And our interviewees shared some very valuable and interesting insights with us, and we would just like to share some of our findings with you. And as Ntando said, we did present this as a poster at the R4P conference, and we've also given our interviewees a feedback sheet. And then, as Ntando also said, we've published this as a paper in JERI. Okay, so by way of some background, ethics guidance does encourage stakeholder engagement in health research broadly and in clinical trials specifically, as well as the ethics review of engagement plans. Now, despite this encouragement and guidance, engagement is often very complex and is likely not perfectly realized when implemented. And also empirical evidence does suggest that RECs don't pay a lot of attention to engagement in their review of protocols. But we found that the ethics review process may present a unique opportunity to try and strengthen practices in clinical trials of HIV prevention. But as I've said, there's very little empirical evidence on the current practices or the perspectives of affected stakeholders regarding this issue. So our study really went some way to try and fill this gap. In the study, we aim to explore how ethics review might facilitate improved stakeholder engagement, as well as to explore some of the achievements and some of the complexities in engagement and in ethics review. Now, after consulting various stakeholders about our initial study concept, we obtained ethics approval from the biomedical REC at UKZN. And then we also obtained informed consent from all of our interview participants. In total, we interviewed 28 individuals from 12 different countries that included Argentina, Australia, Botswana, India, Kenya, Nigeria, the Netherlands, Malawi, South Africa, the US, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. So we interviewed 17 women and 11 men. And our participants were purposefully selected because of their expertise or because prior interviewees had recommended a person or suggested someone who might be knowledgeable in the area. Our interviewees included REC members, researchers involved in HIV prevention trials, CAB members, community liaison officers, advocates, activists, network members, and other HIV prevention stakeholders. We analyzed our data using thematic analysis. So what did we find from our interviews? Well, our interviewees did identify the value of engagement and of reviewing engagement and highlighted a number of benefits. Most interviewees perceived that stakeholder engagement was rooted in and could achieve many ethics and scientific goals. These included strengthened protection for participants, for community stakeholders, and for future beneficiaries by impacting the rigor of the research. In terms of complexities, we found three major themes, the 3 T's. So these include tokenism, toxicity, and tailoring. Firstly, we found that interviewees characterize token engagement in very specific kinds of ways. You might remember that in previous conceptual research, we highlighted that ethics guidance suggests engagement should be early and sustained, dynamic and responsive, and broad and inclusive. And many of our interview participants described engagement in clinical trials as token if it didn't meet these criteria. Interviewees also characterized token engagement in other ways. For example, when engagement is CAB-centric, where one interviewee described CABs as the default position, or engagement that is not resourced appropriately, succinctly illustrated by one participant in the phrase, engagement isn't free. Engagement was also characterized as a token when it's not ethically grounded or where it's overly focused on recruitment. In other words, token engagement is engagement for the wrong reasons. Then secondly, apart from token engagement, interviewees also highlighted other forms of troubling engagement. For example, engagement that can sometimes be inadvertently harmful. For example, when it increases risks for some, as in the quote where CAB representatives from the MSM community might be at risk of stigma in certain settings, or where engagement would reinforce stereotypes and inequalities, for example, where researchers represent themselves as saviors. Thirdly, interviewees highlighted that engagement across various kinds of studies should be tailored or scaled depending on certain factors. These can include, for example, risks to participants, risks to communities, the type of study, the phase of the study, and the novelty of the study. Here, interviewees recognize that the intensity of engagement responses should vary depending on various triggers. This issue, however, seems to need a lot more conceptual work, and we are planning to take this forward in future research. We did have some limitations, and I think it's important that we acknowledge them. So our sample comprises many South Africans. Out of the 28 people that we interviewed, 10 of them were South African. But we do feel that South Africa is a major hub for clinical trials of all HIV prevention products. Also, we didn't sample community stakeholders directly. However, we hope that the community perspective was well represented by advocates and CAB members. Also, generalizability is not normally a priority with qualitative research, as the aim is to capture experience and perspective, but we did but our findings did reach some level of saturation, and we did triangulate our findings by having a sample of diverse nationalities and roles. And we hope that the insights derived from this particular research context might be useful in other similar contexts. So what recommendations do we have? So we've kind of broken this down into 3 major stakeholder groups and thought about possible implications for each stakeholder group. So the first one is RECs. We think that RECs are well placed to counter problematic engagement, so the so-called 3 Ts. We recommend that RECs should be thoughtful in their inquiries regarding engagement to ensure that clinical trials avoid token engagement, and that all studies strive for non-toxic engagement that is appropriately tailored or scaled to the specific study. Also, RECs should amend their application forms so that they're prompting researchers to plan engagement a lot more thoughtfully. So asking those insightful questions. Then the second stakeholder we like to focus on is researchers. So researchers should ask community experts how token engagement could best be avoided in their specific site or context. Researchers should aspire to be inclusive or aspire to inclusive, sustained, and responsive engagement that is well-resourced and highlight the features in those ethics missions. To mitigate potentially harmful or toxic engagement, researchers should ask themselves, have potential risks to engagement to potential participants been minimized? For example, undue pressure from community leaders to take part or not take part in a study. They could ask themselves, have potential risks to community stakeholders been minimized? For example, increased stigma, reinforced stereotypes, and misinformation. And then to ensure tailored engagement, researchers should consider whether planned engagement activities are dosed appropriately, depending on the study risks, the vulnerability of the study population, the study design, complexities, and other relevant factors. And then lastly, we also wanted to think about advocates. And this is obviously up for discussion because we haven't ironed out any of the wrinkles yet. But what we've come up with is that advocates should ask questions of researchers designed to support high quality engagement in the field, including how diverse and sustained engagement will be maintained, as well as funding. Advocates should ask researchers whether engagement activities carry the potential for harm and how to mitigate such harm. Advocates should ask researchers about the level of engagement to be implemented for observational studies versus clinical trials. And then advocates should also amplify the voices and views of community stakeholders to ensure these voices are addressed in the decision-making processes. Advocates should argue and deliberate for those stakeholders who are not represented in key decision-making processes. But obviously, yes, as I said, this slide and these points, we plan to discuss these a little bit. And then lastly, I'd like to thank everyone here for showing an interest in our study. We'd like to thank all of our interviewees who gave up their time and their insights. And we'd also like to thank and acknowledge our funders and partners for their support. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Abigail. That's really lovely and concise, and to really highlighting the important role that each of us, and especially the ethics committees or review bodies, the role that they have to play in really ensuring that we counter token and toxic engagement, and in the process to be able to promote tailored or scaled engagement. And this is the time where we open to the team from HAVEG to really hear if they have any remarks. Otherwise, we're going to open it up. Please use the chat box for any questions, or just raise your virtual hand in order to be able to have an opportunity to really, so that we can hear you and your thoughts or any of the issues the thinking that you might have around this. So shall we hand over to anyone? Kathy is here. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to weigh in on one of the issues when we were thinking about the study, and I think Abigail presented very well the qualitative design, which is really good at giving rich insights. What it's not so good at and doesn't actually try to achieve would be, it doesn't tell us, this kind of study can't tell us anything about the prevalence of so-called tokenism or so-called toxicity. So, and we didn't actually aim to try and do that. Obviously, it would be relevant if there was that kind of study that said, we find that in 90% of clinical trials, stakeholders perceive that engagement is excellent, and it's only in 10% of trials that they have concerns about tokenism. Our study can't do that. What we were trying to do is foreground the sort of inherent expertise that stakeholders have to recognize tokenism. So how do they characterize it and see it? And in that way, how can we try to avoid it? I hope that makes sense. It's just to say that I think our study design has that key limitation, and I think it needs to be, we need to acknowledge that in front of all of you. And I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Kathy. That's really helpful. Is Siyabonga on the call to also have an input from HAVEG?
Thank you very much, Ntando, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I think Abby and Kathy have touched a lot on the issues that we found. And I think the study most importantly highlights the complexity of the role that, people who are primarily responsible for implementing stakeholder engagement, the complexity of their role, and importantly highlights the role that other stakeholders can play in terms of ensuring that what these community liaison officers or engagement staff do is actually easier. And I think one of the interesting findings from the study as well was that many of the diverse stakeholders, as Abigail described, that some were RECs, many of them generally agreed in terms of the significance of stakeholder engagement, and most importantly, the role that RECs can play in terms of ensuring that stakeholder engagement improves, stops from being tokenistic. And the problem, as Abby alluded to, is that one of the problems is, what are the indicators of good stakeholder engagement? Yeah, I think that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Siyabonga. And I think really the theme is very clear out of the 3 T's, that let's counter the 2 T's, which is tokenism and toxic engagement, and really have and promote tailored engagement. And I mean, I think there are a lot of interesting issues that are coming up here, and which I think should be up for discussion. what role can we play as communities in really engaging around these findings with our ethics committees, with our regulatory committees, with the researchers? I see your hand, Yvette, and I'll hand over to you immediately. And please do like Yvette has done, raise your virtual hand and let us open this platform for engagement.
Thank you so much, Ntando.
And just after you, thank you, Yvette, Morenike is going to come through.
Thank you so much for this engagement, and congratulations to the HAVEG team for the work that they've done. I think it is about time that we do have this. I was one of the most excited people when I saw this discussion, because I don't think there is a way where we agree that is not tokenism with researchers, research sites, and as advocates. I think the engagement has been tokenistic because of how we engage. As advocates, from beginning of trials, do we say to researchers, research sites, and funders of research, engagement does not just happen. Engagement comes planned at the beginning of the trial as we decide on what trial should happen. And what happens at that time, and I'm glad the issue around cabs came out, and not to blame them, but most of the sites use the cabs whom they are familiar with as, oh, we do have engagement, who are these advocates, and how do they end up being more important than the people that we're engaging in, because of the hard questions. So for me, the discussion is important, but it will not stop it from being tokenistic unless we all treat each other as equal partners when we do engagement. And engagement is not something, right now where we are, engagement is a nice to do, a nice to have. But I also see the field continuously changing, with advocates putting their hands up and leading some of the engagement where engagement is not happening, or sometimes insisting that engagement happen. And sometimes also, Ntando, and you know some of these global advisory boards, expanding how we engage with researchers so that we do not become a one voice. There is a thing around researchers that, okay, if I've heard from Yvette, it means I've heard from the world. No, Yvette is not community engagement. And I'm glad this discussion is happening, but I also want us to not only work with CABs as advocates, but CABs also to welcome the work that we do. And we get to a point where we really, really talk about this. Because sometimes, I would be blunt, researchers also abuse CAB members.
Thank you, Yvette. Yes, engaging Yvette only can be tokenistic engagement. Morenike?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's indeed a pleasure to be here, and really congrats to the research team. I think that was really beautiful. Yeah, pulling that together and finally putting in writing in, I guess, another way, what we've always talked about. And for me, I felt that concern that this is how many years I've been involved with this advocacy, and we're still at this point of tokenism. But a few reflections for me. I think one of the things that I feel has brought us here, or still limited what we're doing, is the fact that community engagement in research design and implementation has largely been citadeled in the HIV prevention world. And the HIV prevention world is just a drop in the big world of research. Please appreciate the fact that researchers transit. They go, they come. And that's also my experience with working with ethics committee members. Ethics committee is a transiting committee. And therefore you build the capacity of this person this time. Once they transit, new people come who have never heard, don't understand, and you're at the beginning all over again. But having said that, even with the ethics committee, that I think is our strongest door of entry, and one of the places where practice can completely change if they do understand that, is the fact that they truly don't know how to make it happen. They have measures, standardized measures for clinical practice, manufacturing practice, every other monitoring tools, but they don't have standardized practice for community engagement. And community engagement is not a reason for you to stop a trial or tell them that they're not doing well enough to suspend the implementation. So they don't have that bite and they don't even know how to make it work. So for me, I think if you're going to really move and make impact and not come here again in another 10 years and have exactly the same paper repeated in terms of findings on the field, we have to extend our push around community engagement beyond the HIV prevention field and get it integrated into research practices, because this is what it is. Researchers coming from the classrooms, coming from other worlds that come into the HIV field, and then continue to do what they haven't had their capacity built in the classroom to do. I think for me, those are the few things I would want to say. Yes. Main message, let's institutionalize this in the research and ethics world. Thank you. Over.
No, thank you very much, Morenike. Those are really, great points and inputs. And I think as well as there's some of the things that, Yvette was also raising as part of really reflecting on this. And we'd really like to hear from you all really about your thoughts on all of this. And and this publication and what it really means for engagement. And I think to Morenike's point, this really gives, for me, looking and going through this work, it actually is providing language to be able to really point out and, using this to be able to point out and say, actually, this kind of engagement, this care-centric engagement, it's something that is good, I think, as Yvette had highlighted, but it is not everything. How do we then find and really move from this point so that, 10 years to come, I think as Morenike is saying, we really are engaging in a different way. Kathy, I see your hand is up. And I think for you all, again, I think there are some questions. We have a question from Bobby, and you have attempted to respond to that question, but it would be great to also hear, because Bobby is asking, how many respondents did you reach in academia as well as the research organization? And Sylvia is also asking how much reference has been done to the GPP guidelines. And I think you've responded to that as well, that GPP guidelines were actually referred to as very helpful and as a key achievement. Over to you, Katie, and then we'll hear from Nita. And Yvette,
thank you so much.
Sorry, Katie, Yvette, if your hand, there we go, thank you.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that there's quite a strong theme in the paper, which we didn't really focus on for this talk. And that was the degree to which the ethics review process itself is also open to allegations of tokenism, toxicity, and poor tailoring. And I think that's really worth bearing in mind. And it makes us think that because they are both processes, they're not outcomes, they're not once-off interventions, they're processes, both of them. And because they're processes, it reminds us that all processes can run the risk or fall foul of these standards of being properly tailored, of being non-token and non-toxic, because they are processes. So our interviewees also gave us really nice examples of where they feel the ethics review process itself was not optimal. And I think that's very important, because it wasn't just focusing on some of the perceived deficiencies of the engagement processes. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that really an artifact of publishing this piece first. We have another piece that points out ways in which engagement and review were commended and perceived to have been very successful. We didn't launch that article first because it has there's less that can be done with an article like that. But I think it is worth noting that there is this second piece that tries to capture and collate ways in which both engagement and ethics review were highly valued and were seen in many respects as having achieved a lot over the last couple of years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kate. And we'll hand over to you, Nita. But Vincent, I would also like to invite you to come through as well. And I think you're raising an important point. Please just unmute yourself and really give us your contribution. Nita?
Hi, so I wanted to thank you very much, everyone. I wanted to firstly congratulate the organizers for doing a webinar linked to publication in community and stakeholder engagement. I think that is excellent, and I like the idea that we scientifically publishing and reviewing these processes. But my question is that where to next? Because I'm currently focusing on community evolution, based on my own experience, and I'd like us to see the ethics committee reviews changing and looking at SE as a criteria. And I'm not sure how we can achieve this sooner than later. And Ntando and Kathy, we've been part of many of these seminars. So that's the first thing. The second I wanted to ask is, who defined tokenism, toxicity, and tailoring? Because these are terminologies that, if I had to consider translations, are complex. So I'd like to understand, how was it defined and who defined it in order for there to be a response to these issues? Thank you.
Vincent, could you come through as well, please, just as we figure out some of the hard questions that Nita is asking. And we're welcoming everybody who has really just joined us on this engagement forum to really talk about the 3 T's of engagement and really what we're really asking very important questions. This is a webinar and it's a talk, there's a publication, but we really, come up to talk about the publication. But what's important is really where to next, what's the call to action and how do we do that? I'm inviting and challenging Vincent Basacha to come through as well with his remark. Over to you, Katie.
Thank you so much. I'll just respond to one of Nita's comments because I think it's very useful. Tokenism was not in a sense very easy for interviewees to understand because it's sort of a well-used term. Toxic was not a term that was actually spontaneously raised by interviewees, and we make that clear in the paper. That's something that that's our terminology, as is tailoring. So on those 2 last issues, and I'll ask Abby to add to this, those were thematic labels that we gave that seemed to capture many of the facets of that phenomenon that we were hearing. I hope that makes sense, Nita. And Abby, please feel free and Sia to correct me if you'd like.
Sorry, just to add to what Kathy was saying, yes, so a lot of our interviewees spoke about tokenism, and the term tokenism was pretty common, everybody used it. But then a lot of our interviewees spoke about issues that were almost like a harmful consequence of or an experience that happened where something came out that was negative. And so we kind of thought of a label for that, and that's how toxic emerged. And so did tailoring. So tailoring came from this idea that engagement can be scaled. It's on a continuum. The engagement isn't a one size fits all. So we kind of came about, we termed that sort of theme from what participants were saying. And we liked the 3 T's because it was an alliteration. So it kind of fitted nicely as 3 concepts, 3 T's. Yeah, that's kind of where we got that from.
Yeah, no, I think the 3 T's are really catchy, and I think being catchy in the sense of helping to be able to emphasize these important aspects that are really raised by this engagement. And we hope that was helpful, Nita, and over to you.
Thank you very much.
Yvette, you can go ahead and unmute.
Thanks, Ntando. Yes, I was hoping that the reason for this was not because it's catchy. I mean, it's some the words that were used. For us, it's important because we've seen how this happens in the research side. My question to Kathy would be, there's a saying that a mouse bites, and after biting it blows. Can we hold off on that, praising the research sites for good ethics a bit? Because I think, I feel it's an attempt to soften the blow. I don't think researchers or trial sites would be happy with the results. Not that it's pointing anyway, but nobody wants to talk about the discussion. The discussion that's currently happening is a discussion that only advocates are excited about and will be open about. I'm not even a little bit concerned that we have so little engagement in the core because of how this is and can be a very toxic, tokenistic, and tailored environment, in a sense, speaking to the same people. Being an advocate or a CAP member who is speaking in trial sites, speaking out against injustices or things that do not make sense, how that can affect a livelihood. So I do not expect nothing else than us threading carefully around the topic and waiting to just have the discussion around about how it is, because it is the environment that we are in. And I have already said this previously, and I'll repeat it again. One day we should, as advocates and CAB members and community representatives, write a book on how we sold out our communities to researchers to the highest bidder. And I still continue to say that because I feel you cannot engage if you are not seen as an equal partner on the table. As long as researchers, sites, and research developers sees community engagement as, by the way, and also not see us as equal partners and contributors, and we always have to fight for us to be at the table, it is tokenistic, because you are not having me there because you want me, my point of view. You are having me there to tick a box. You are having an advocate in the discussion or at the table because if you do not have them, they are going to write, Tian is going to write a piece about how we are excluded. So as long as that's happening, these 3 T's are much more than just sounding catchy for me. Thank you.
Yeah. The 3 T's are quite catchy, and I think catchy things really have us talking. Yet it's indeed, as you say, that it should really be beyond that and should really call us to action. And we hope the catchiness really is a call to action for all of us. Kathy and Siabonga, I saw you come through. I don't know if you wanted to respond. I think as you're still coming, again, I'll just emphasize one of the things that Vincent is raising, that integration of community engagement in biomedical research processes is key to addressing the key findings from this exciting study, that we should actually have community engagement integrated in review processes. And I think Vincent goes on to tell us about, sort of give us a call to action, that as advocates, we need to have our voices not only heard, but put into practice. And we accept that you might not be able to talk to us, Vincent, to really say more about your input here, but you do think strongly and believe that we need to approach this from an ethical point of view. Community engagement should be part of the basis upon which any research project should be evaluated for approval. We do need to advocate for our voices to be heard by regulatory bodies, to demand for proof of adequate community engagement for as one of the basic considerations. Siyabonga and Kathy.
I'd just like to respond very briefly to say that that's one of the things about qualitative research. One of the things.
We seem to have lost you. I don't know if it's just me.
That resonates closely with the.
Ooh.
I hope something relevant from her perspective, and I think it sounds like it did. And just to get back to Vincent, I think it's absolutely critical.
Kathy, I don't know if you're getting any indicator that your line might be breaking. I hope it's not mine, and I'm not getting any indication here. Perhaps in the meantime,
one avenue to do that is to work with community representatives on RECs. Thank you.
All right. I hope everyone heard Kathy, and if you didn't, then I mean, if you did, it means that there might be a problem with my line as well. Siyabonga, did you want to say something?
No, thank you, Ntando. I think my question or response was answered beautifully by Kathy and Abby's comments. Yeah, but I think it wasn't your line. Kathy, we weren't able to hear what you just mentioned.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I apologize for a bad line. It's just saying I'm glad we managed to resonate, the paper managed to resonate a little bit with the experience of some of the advocates in the field. I apologize for poor line quality. Over to you.
Wonderful, we got that, Kathy. We really were able to get that. So I think, yeah, now there's a suggestion that you can go ahead and type all of that. So we'd really like to encourage everyone to really come through, and I think we might be processing a lot of this. You might not have had an opportunity to really engage with the paper. I think Melissa has put it out there for all of us to, for you to be able to really look at the publication, so that you really are in a position to be able to engage with all of the work fully that is coming out of here. We're really seeing that we have everyone here, from all the way in Nigeria, in East and Southern Africa. And of course, we are having all our partners and comrades across the globe, especially in the US, really joining us. And again, we really welcome you today, and you're in the right place in the engagement forum, where we're talking about the 3 T's of tokenism, toxicity, tailoring, and stakeholder engagement. And I think the message is that there's everybody who is involved in the process of research has a role to play to make sure that we counter tokenistic engagement, we counter toxic engagement, and in the process, we promote a tailored engagement, and really making sure that engagement becomes the center of all of the work that we are doing in HIV prevention research. And I think in all of the research that we all are involved in. I am now tempted to reach out to some of the names that I hear, that I am sure that they really have something to say about this topic. So please just save yourself from being called by me, and just really come through and really share on this discussion that we are all having today. So there are some of the issues, and I think Kathy continues to emphasize that it is important. It is important that qualitative research try to capture experiences of people in the field. And I hope that after hearing Yvette's input, the paper was able to do that. And I indeed hope that. And in fact, we'll also add to what Morenike had mentioned at the beginning, that it's actually unfortunate that we really are still dealing with tokenistic engagement. And but I think the response from the team was actually that there is an acknowledgement of the work that has gone into engaging, in engagement, and really improving engagement through the good participatory guidelines that have really helped in all of this week. I think as Sylvia had really asked, that is, have GPP been part of this engagement? And Matthias is actually giving us a remark that unfortunately, even the research ethics committees are suffering from the 3 T's. We need to target the research ethics committees if we are to roll down to community engagement. I mean, does the HAVEG team have anything to say about how they have experienced the research ethics committees as part of all of this work?
Just to say to Matthias that I think the paper does support that remark, that RECs and RECs themselves that we managed to interview, as well as of it, were sometimes REC processes as well experience these problems. But I'd just like to cite that with Jessica and others, we've tried to develop a course for RECs as one of the main audiences, a lovely interactive course just about how they can be appropriately sensitized to stakeholder engagement. And it is available on the Engage website, and it would be lovely to try and get that out there and get more RECs involved in taking that course. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kate. I think with the 10 minutes that is remaining, and I think that Nita is really highlighting something very important, and we want to use the 10 minutes, and I hope Melissa is ready to really assign us quickly into groups for about 3 to 5 minutes, where we really come up with with the next steps to really be able to take this all of the submissions made on this publication into action. What are the things that we can consider as part of taking this to the next stage? Melissa, would you be able to help us with assigning us to breakout rooms to have a quick 5-minute discussion? And I think it might be about 4 breakout rooms.
Sure.
So please let us go into those for 5 minutes and then come back after 5 minutes to really be able to have the last 5 minutes to really hear what are the important things that we need to do as next steps on this. All right, I think we form part of this group, and which I think will help in having us really have a talk through on some of the things. And oh, I guess I have to join. Oh, well, thank you very much. I think people are coming back from the breakout rooms, and we are going to be hearing, and we don't really have a lot of time. We have about 2 minutes, and hopefully anyone who is ready. I will, at this point, pick up Chilufia to give us the quick update, and she's going to give us an example of using seconds very effectively to give us a quick update. Over to you.
Sure. So from our group, we identified 3 areas: review of the GPP guidelines, and also from inception, the GPP should be binding so that their areas for engagement are well articulated. And also, we felt it's very important that the ethics committee review undergo training so as to remain functional. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That was quick and sweet. I know that Nita and Moronica's group was also rocking it.
Okay, so in 2 seconds, the first is that Ntando, I think that we need to have a second webinar on this question critically so that we have action items. It's almost non-negotiable in my mind. In our feedback, we also spoke about the role of the RECs because it's only prevention researchers that are implementing and that we need to move away from that. That's the first critical point. The second is that we really have to work together to make it national in Africa that engagement is and GPP is like GCP and HSP, and it now must become non-negotiable. Lastly, competencies of scientists, PIs on SC needs to be assessed and evaluated. Thank you.
Thank you, Nita. The 2 groups are sharing, I think, 2 minutes.
I don't know who's reporting for our group. Jess, will you go ahead?
Our group, asked the question about what is that engagement and how can it be seen in the different forms, and how do we bring the paper out of prevention and into implementation research? And then we also discussed some tools for community to help measure and monitor the engagement process from the outside and trying to help community stakeholders, much like Talca is doing, create tools to sort of assess a community engagement program and be able to provide real-time metrics and feedback. And so we had just a brief discussion. So I think that's a good summary.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Jess. The last group. Ooh. Melissa, you will know who was in the last group. They are hiding. Well, I think we've really come to the top of the hour for our discussion. Yes, go ahead, Navita.
I don't think we assigned anybody, but I'm happy if I can add in if others want to jump in.
You are assigned.
I'm assigned now. We discussed in terms of what's next, really wanting to make sure that this is all disseminated widely and really popularized among civil society so that way we can act on the recommendations. And also had a conversation briefly about the difference between the defining engagement and then just involving people and being able to actually clarify that. And the last thing we discussed was that there could be opportunities for earlier engagement with RECs, but realize that I think there's a need to understand a little bit more about how long people stay on as REC members, what kind of education is required amongst REC members to see if there's opportunities in that pipeline of education, and what kind of common understanding REC members come to these conversations with as other opportunities to really, really think through the elements of tokenism and in what we've discussed on the call.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks to all of you really for your presence here in this engagement forum. And we shall be meeting again in the last month of May, where we'll either be looking at continuing with this engagement and really having follow-up so that all the call to action that has been presented here is really taken seriously, is taken to the next step. And we'd like to thank VETA-HI through Melissa's leadership for really helping in really making sure that this is happening. And to all the partners, thank you to all of you for really being part of this engagement. And thanks to the HAVEG team for really presenting us with this work. And hopefully we really are taking steps to make sure that this does not end up as catchy as Yvette has told us, but it is really taken forward in very tangible ways to really transform and improve how engagement happens and how ethics happen in research. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye all.